And then in purple, you have identity. So essentially what we have here is all the capabilities inside of our portfolio that map to the private cloud vision that our customers are being told by analysts. So this is really what RHCI is positioned to deliver to customers, is that complete private cloud. And you've seen this, right? It basically is Red Hat Enterprise Virtualization, Red Hat Enterprise Linux OpenStack platform, and Red Hat CloudForms. Those are the components that make up Red Hat Cloud Infrastructure and provide those pieces that the customer needs to build a private cloud. And hopefully you noticed between last slide and this slide, there is a glaring gap in something that RHCI is missing, and we can talk to what we're going to be doing in the future to address that. All right. So RHCI 4. So what I want to do first is talk about what's in RHCI 4, and then what integrations we've already performed inside RHCI 4. So RHCI 4 is a combination of Red Hat CloudForms 3, as you see on this slide, Red Hat Enterprise Virtualization 3.3, and Red Hat Enterprise Linux OpenStack Platform 4. Those are the versions of the pieces that we're shipping today. What I'm going to do is I'm going to lay those on the timeline for you guys so you can kind of get an idea of what's currently included in RHCI. And I keep Red Hat Enterprise Linux at the bottom here because it's kind of a foundational element. This isn't to imply that CloudForms 3 is running on RHEL 6.5. It's just to show you the RHEL release time frame in relation to the other components of RHCI. So RHCI 4 is our current release. It includes CloudForms 3, RHEV 3.3, and OpenStack Platform 4. And roughly, the RHCI releases come out and correspond to the release of an OpenStack platform. So we've kind of anchored the RHCI releases to the OpenStack platform release. So what do we have inside RHCI 4 already? So this is stuff that's already is already integrated between our products. So today, RHEV and RHELOSP have Neutron integration. So this allows users to basically extend their RHEV networks via Neutron plugins. So this means that they can start to leverage the Neutron plugins from their OpenStack environment or OpenStack deployment in RHEV. And they can also consume Neutron networks within RHEV using Open vSwitch. There's a bunch of other features you see here, overlay networks and DHCP and VM IP assignment. We'll dive into the actual RHEV roadmap later. Right now, what we're looking at is how RHCI is integrating together. RHEV and RHELOSP could already also share glance. So RHEV can connect to and consume OpenStack glance images, as an example. This is pretty cool. So I can now have an image store that services both my OpenStack environment and my RHEV environment. I no longer have to maintain two image stores. RHEV can also export those images from RHEV itself into glance. So this is a pretty good step to be able to say all my existing RHEV images that I have, I can dump them into glance, and then I can start using them in OpenStack. And this is starting to centralize the image management between both RHEV and OpenStack. So not only are we integrating RHEV and RHELOSP together, but we're integrating CloudForms with both RHEV and RHELOSP. So to date, with RHCI 4, we already have this level of capability. So we're leveraging in the OpenStack platform, we're leveraging the Nova API, and in RHEV, we're leveraging the RHEVM API to provide discovery, analysis, capacity utilization collection. We are also already providing self-service from CloudForms across RHEV and OpenStack with quota and approvals. We're also doing event capture, so we connect to the AMQP event bus on RHEL OpenStack platform, today with Cupid, and we'll talk about RabbitMQ in the future in a few more slides. And we also do event capture and response across RevM as well. So we use the RevM API to capture those events. And we do reporting and chargeback from CloudForms by connecting to both RHEV, the data warehouse, and to the Ceilometer deployment in Red Hat Enterprise Linux OpenStack platform. So hopefully this gives you a good idea. We've already done some work between integrating RHEV and OpenStack together, mainly around Neutron and Glance. We've already done a lot of work around CloudForms integrating with both RHEV and Red Hat Enterprise Linux OpenStack platform. So let me pause right there. Any questions about the current functionality of RHCI? It's still rather limited, admittedly, that we can integrate image storage and Neutron networking, and we can integrate a over-the-top kind of management platform. But before I go into the component releases, do you guys have any questions? All right. Let's talk about the component release roadmap and functionality. So if we were to track out, yes, the question was, is RHCI already GA? Yes, RHCI 4 is already generally available. So it was released shortly after RHEL OpenStack Platform 4 was. So it's been available. And what you can see here on this slide is really that in the June-July timeframe, we're going to be releasing RHCI 5, which will correspond roughly to the release of RHEV 3.4, Red Hat Enterprise Linux OpenStack Platform 5. And just to note here, when CloudForms 3.1 comes out, it will be immediately available in RHCI 5. So RHCI is not gating any of the releases. Essentially what happens is it's a packaging mechanism by which we are basically integrating the underlying products, and then when a new version comes out, we basically make it available immediately. You can also see that in the first calendar quarter of December 2015, we're planning a RHCI 6 release today that will also include RHEL OpenStack Platform 6. So hopefully this gives you a good idea. Let's zoom in on a couple of the product components. Well, Andrew, Andrew's asking about satellite link included in RHCI. We'll talk about that towards the end of the presentation here. So, all right. So RHEV 3.4. Let's dive into here. I'm gonna go pretty quickly through some of these. I'm gonna hit some of the high-level bullet points because we have to go through RHEV, we have to go through OpenStack, and we have to go through CloudForms. So a lot to cover, but hopefully this gives you guys a good idea of everything we're doing at the infrastructure layer, as opposed to just focusing on a single technology, but still getting deep in each one, right? So a couple of big things in RHEV 3.4. I would say the biggest, actually, probably in my mind, is happening on the right-hand side under the networking. The OpenStack Neutron integration is basically allowing RHEV users the ability to use OpenStack Neutron for networks, and also using things like IPAM and L3 routing and security groups. So those sorts of things are basically becoming native technologies for VMs on RHEV. So that's coming in RHEV 3.4, which is in beta right now. Another big piece here is the mixed storage domains and data centers. So what's really nice here is you can actually take a VM and spread its disks across several storage domains within the same data center. So if I wanted to have one on a fiber channel storage and one on NFS, I could do that within the same data center on a single VM. And then another piece here is the template versioning. So this is basically, you could actually select the VM and use it to create a new version of a template, or you can edit the template and then do a simple save as to save a new version. So this template versioning is going to be very powerful. Of course, all three of those, the template versioning specifically is going to be very interesting to see as CloudForms can then start to utilize the state machine and the APIs to perform template version updates. So that's going to be something that's going to be key to kind of the whole RHCI story, is that template version. A rough date for RHEV 3.4, yes. If you can go to, I'm not sure, Mick, if you are an internal Red Hat employee, but those are all posted on the engineering portal inside of Red Hat. And I'm also getting some background noise. All right, I muted you, Jeff. All right, so so that's some of the things in RHEV 3.4. Hot plug CPU, obviously another large one as well, right? So let's move on to RHEV 3.5. So while we're talking RHEV, we'll just go on to the next version here. All right, just take a look at who's not muted real quick. Guest, you are muted. All right. So RHEV 3.5, this is kind of slated towards the end of calendar year 2015 here. In RHEV 3.5, some of the more interesting features are basically being able to start editing running VMs. So being able to edit a running VM to change any of the configuration on that VM while it's running. So this is certainly a big feature as well, and will be important from a RHCI standpoint, because now CloudForms can start to also make those edits to those VMs. That'll make the environments much more dynamic. Live merge is actually an interesting one as well. You can actually delete VM disk snapshots that are no longer needed while the VM is continuing to run. So this will allow you to basically be able to delete old snapshots, making it much more operationally friendly. And finally, I'll highlight on the network side, the delivery of an OpenStack Neutron as a VM appliance is scheduled for, currently slated for Rev 3.5. So this is great because today, deployment of Neutron as a service in Rev requires a lot of, manual work. Whereas when this Neutron VM appliance is delivered, it will basically, instead of having to manually deploy Neutron and the Keystone services, for example, you'd be able to deploy the virtual appliance and makes services more easily deployed. All right. So that's the highlights on Rev between 3.4 and 3.5. Like I said, I'll make these slides available, and I can give you links to more details, whether it's upstream or internal as appropriate as we go. Now let's dive into OpenStack. So you have RHEL OpenStack Platform 5, which is coming in this calendar quarter, based on Icehouse. And then you also have RHELOSP 6 coming up. For the purposes of this, we're just going to focus on the roadmap for 5.0 because the OpenStack community is obviously moving very fast, so I don't want to kind of focus on Juno yet. The Icehouse release is still pretty imminent on there. One of the questions, is there any plans to install hosted engine in RevH itself rather than a RHEL node? This is a good question. I do not know of any specific plans to provide that. As far as I could tell, they had hosted engine on iSCSI SAN as an option, but they did not have it on RevH. So that's something that we'll have to I'll have to take offline and get back to you. Definitely a valid question. I can tell you from an RHCI standpoint, one of the things we're looking at is how RHEL Atomic and Docker could possibly provide a solution to lifecycle management of the actual infrastructure components themselves. So an example would be running RevM as a Docker in Docker containers on top of, say, RHEL Atomic, as opposed to leveraging RevH. So that's something we've been discussing. All right, so RHELOSP 5, let's dive into a couple of these. I'm going to break it down into each individual service, and we'll hit some of the highlights. And hopefully you guys can use this. Like I said, most of this doesn't require an NDA. Like these slides, for example, don't require an NDA. It's just really kind of towards the end of the roadmap that we would ask for it. So hopefully these are useful for you guys. All right. I see some people are having difficulty connecting. Hopefully the rest of you can still see. Just let me know. All right, so on RHELOSP 5, we'll start with Swift. So Swift is the object storage. The main thing I want to highlight here is the discovery capabilities that are coming in Icehouse. So this basically each Swift cluster that's exposing an API will by default have under /info the ability to query it to find out all about the different capabilities of the cluster as well as the clients attached to it. So this is going to be very beneficial to both the customer deploying OpenStack, but also from an RHCI perspective as CloudForms begins to evolve to look as OpenStack matures, right, and these APIs become more full-featured. CloudForms will be able to begin to take advantage of them as well. So this is a big step forward on the OpenStack side to be able to do that. Object storage standpoint. All right, Nova. So some of the big things in Nova in the Icehouse release. Limited live upgrades. I'm not going to touch this because this is a Mick asked if there's age-off capability coming in Swift. I am not aware of it, but I'm going to, what I'll do is I'll follow up with you guys on all these for that. So I'm not aware of anything in Swift for that today. Sure. So with Nova, limited live upgrades, right? That's a whole story. But the idea is you can upgrade your controller infrastructure first, and then subsequently upgrade the individual compute nodes without requiring downtime. Of course, this is still fairly new in OpenStack, so that's something that would probably require much more detailed analysis. It's not as simple as upgrading Rev, as an example, right? A couple other things here. VirtIO iSCSI in libvirt KVM is going to be supported, so this is obviously going to improve scalability and performance over VirtIO block. That's a big step forward. and Neutron event support. So the libvirt driver now supports actually waiting for an event from Neutron. It's going to lead to better booting, right? So you don't get into this race condition where the instance is expecting a network to be there and it's not. So those sorts of pieces are coming. Along the API, there is a couple things. One, they deprecated XML. JSON is now the supported API for this, so that's kind of a big deal. Also, the compute node decommissioning. So it was before that compute nodes would continue to be listed in the compute service until the system was reprovisioned. But now there is actually a extended services delete inside of the API that will actually remove compute nodes and make it nice and clean. They've also separated the administrative actions. So this is going to be important for kind of, when you want to just expose administrative actions for Nova to a certain class of user, you can start to do that, and they're being separated out. And the exposing of the hypervisor IP address is actually very important too. This is going to be good for CloudForms to be able to take advantage of in the future, to be able to pull those IP addresses of those nodes up into CloudForms. Yes, so Andrew, that is a community choice, I believe, that they made. Andrew's asking about the, no, they're deprecating XML in favor of JSON. So XML format has been deprecated, JSON is supported. Right. So around the scheduler, Nova's had a number of improvements in the scheduler in RHELOSP 5. The main one here is the affinity and anti-affinity server group types. So basically predefine a policy, and then you could put your server into either a affinity or anti-affinity server group types. On the compute side, finally wrapping up on Nova is more notifications. So this is great because one of the main issues we had connecting CloudForms to OpenStack was the level of information and APIs that were coming from OpenStack at the time. And as OpenStack, Icehouse was kind of termed to be the stabilization release, right? And it really was. They put a bunch of new notifications in, including when compute hosts are powered on, shut down, rebooted, maintenance mode, those sorts of things. All those notifications are now coming out of Nova, which is great. And graceful shutdown. So it wouldn't just power off the compute node. It would wait until all the requests had been satisfied on that compute node before terminating. All right. That's Nova. Let's jump into Glance, and we'll just keep right on going. So the big one here that I saw that is very interesting here is that VMware Data Store, you can add a VMware Data Store as a storage backend for Glance. So I have not, I don't know the level of QE or testing that's gone on this, but it seems to reason to me that if you could connect RHEV Glance, and you could connect Glance to VMware Data Store, we may have a pass-through option by which all your images in VMware could show up even in RHEV at this point, which would be a very interesting, migration possibility, right? The only other thing here is an image location strategy. So basically, there's a location order or a store type that you can specify in Glance now that will allow users to, that will help you decide where to store your images in a much more optimized manner. So you could say, hey, store them based on this location and use this location order to store the images, or kind of store them based on the store type, whether it's use Swift first, then use S3, or use a file first, then use S3. You can set that up now. Kind of nice. All right, Horizon. So Horizon, I thought this one would be good for you guys in APAC, right? A lot of language support is now available. So they've got Hindi. And then they also have updated a lot of language support around even Australian English, Japanese, Korean, and simplified the traditional Chinese. So those are all been updated. One of the other things is stack updates and heat. So you can now perform stack updates through Horizon for your heat stacks, which is pretty nice. And Ceilometer now allows administrators to basically on a per project basis across services, view daily usage reports. So now your Ceilometer users can get utilization reports, on a per project basis across the different services, which is something that I know a lot of folks kind of struggled with. There's a bunch of other stuff happening here, right? Host aggregates and availability zones, router rules, all that sort of stuff. Again, I'm trying to get through the entire roadmap here, so I don't want to spend too much time on these. All right, Keystone. So Keystone, there's a couple of big pieces here. One is that it now supports consuming federated authentication, so you could add multiple identity providers. This is coming out of the work by Shibboleth that's going on. And password updates, another one. So this is one that I know a lot of people struggle with. Users can now update their own passwords in Icehouse, RHELOSP 5. And then finally, the token driver supports persistent key value store. So you can store your identities in, say, Redis or Mongo or Cassandra. Also, if you've heard of the Cloud Audit Data Federation, this is a DMTF open standard for cloud audit, and it's being kind of led by, I think, IBM and NetQ right now. So those event notifications from Keystone are now included in RHELOSP 5, so those are being created if you have any customers who are following this sort of work. And we have a bunch of create, read, update, and delete for everything inside of there, right? Roles, groups, trust. That's kind of a common theme you're going to see across all these services. Additional notifications. But remember that each one of those notifications is dropping onto the AMQP event bus, and CloudForms can now begin to act on those. So when a user is created or a network is created or a compute node is powered off, we can start to now take notification and bring those into CloudForms and perform higher level service orchestration. So pretty cool. Okay, Neutron. So the big thing in Neutron is the deprecation of the OVS plugin in favor of ML2. So ML2 actually combines Linux Bridge and OVS support into one plugin. The key here in RHELOSP 5 is that there is an upgrade script from people moving from Havana Icehouse who want to convert to ML2. But as I've been told, there's no rollback. So you don't want to test this out on a live system. But the idea is that moving to the modular layer 2 plugin is the direction for the future here. And a bunch of new VPN drivers, plugins, those sorts of things, which you can certainly probably research, pull up on your own as well. All right, Cinder. So Cinder, the couple of big things here that stood out to me were the ability to retype your volumes. Basically, you can make changes to existing volumes, which is something that you couldn't do before. And also, again, the common theme of Ceilometer notifications. So here we're seeing attach and detach notifications inside of Cinder. All right, moving on to Ceilometer. Ceilometer actually has an events API. It's in the style of StackTack. So StackTack was something that Rackspace was working on initially, and it basically allowed them to, initially they built it to debug OpenStack Nova, but it has been expanded into being to read notifications and basically store them in a database. So you basically would listen on the AMQP event bus, take everything you get there, push it into a database, and then make it very easy to query. They have some they have a tool, I think, called Stacky at the command line that basically allow you to start to query a lot of that stuff in there. So very interesting. Also, time-constrained alarms. So if you want, based on time of day or the day of the week or certain variables, you can actually have alarming set up differently, right? So some maturity showing up in Ceilometer, as well as a bunch of new sources you see. VMware vCenter Server API. I highlighted down there on the bottom the Open Daylight REST APIs as a new source, so that's good to see. So these are some of the things coming in Ceilometer. All right, Heat. So Heat is of course the orchestration service. One of the new things is HOT, which stands for Heat Orchestration Templates. It's the new template format, and it is meant to replace the CloudFormation template format as a native format supported by Heat over time. And so you can find a detailed HOT specification format if you go out to the Heat website or the OpenStack the Heat blueprint page. You can pull it up and take a look at it. But the idea here is they don't want to preclude you from running CloudFormations. They want to get away from being tied directly to it. So Another thing here that's interesting is we allow in RHELOSP P5 auto scaling of any arbitrary collection of resources. So you can basically use this the auto scaling group and scaling policy to start to scale resources using heat in a much easier fashion using those two resources. File inclusion, so you can actually get files. So the Python heat client will actually go pull these files for you and pull them in as you're orchestrating your heat stack launch. So this is going to be very beneficial if you want to include user data or files into your heat stack as you deploy it. And then finally, one of the things that's really nice is the stack abandon, adopt, and preview. So stack preview actually allows you to, when you want to deploy a stack, you can heat stack. You can actually deploy it using the preview action, and it will come back and tell you all the resources that your heat stack is expecting to be there. So this is very useful if you're authoring something with heat, because you no longer have to launch it, wait for it to fail, and figure out what was missing. You can actually start to preview what resources are needed, and then make sure they're there before you try and launch it. And abandon and adopt are really interesting too. You can abandon your stack. This would leave your instances running, but it would delete the stack from heat. Then what you could do is you could then adopt the stack by looking back at it and adopting it. And so right now, adopt is still kind of experimental, as far as I understand, in RHELOSP P5. But you can see how this would be important if you were, say, adopting, if you were trying to update heat on an OpenStack environment. So what you could potentially do in the future is you could abandon all your heat stacks that are running. Let's say I have 100 heat stacks running. I abandon all of those, and then I could shut down my old heat stack service. And then I can upgrade it, and then I could start the heat services again, and then I could then go adopt all those 100 heat stacks. And in doing so, I've just essentially updated heat and adopted the stacks that were there before. All right, looks like I have a question. A little outside of RHCI, but have there been any discussions on something like a Cloud Tools child channel of RHEL that includes things like heat CFN tools? So there is a RH Common tool channel that does have a bunch of packages in it. I know RHELOSP also ships with Puppet and those various things. I'm not exactly sure all the packages that are in there. It is a good question. It's one of the things we're looking at from an RHCI standpoint is, should we create an RHCI Common channel that includes even things like Foreman, the base Foreman that's being used, for example, with RHELOSP P5, so that we can start to extend that beyond deployment of just OpenStack. So I think there's some work that has to be done before we can get some of those decisions as far as the channels go, but I think that's certainly somewhere where we're heading. I don't know as far as heat CFN tools specifically, but gotcha. Okay, yeah, no, that makes sense, Andrew, that you want to do that. So yeah, we can definitely take that offline. What I'll do is I'll copy and paste this chat window after, and I'll follow up with you guys. Yeah. All right, Trove. So we've only got 25 minutes left here, so I'm going to start speeding up. So Trove is the database as a service. And basically, the big things here are, one, it's actually a project, right, inside of OpenStack now. And so we're shipping it, and you can do user and schema management. So this is the big thing here. You can actually do this through the create, read, and update, delete management of MySQL users, and then you could also even the backup and restore. You can actually stream your output to, say, a Swift container. All right. Moving on. All right. So we've covered RHELOSP P5. Let's dive into the last piece of RHCI, which is CloudForms. The current release, as you remember, was 3.0, and 3.1 is coming within the quarter between June and September is the plan. So a couple of features that are coming in CloudForms 3.1 in the roadmap here are, first off, proprietary library replacement. So there was a couple of libraries that were keeping CloudForms from being open sourced, and so those have been replaced for the 3.1 timeframe. Along with, in the process, doing some security hardening. Also, a version 1 of a REST API. So as you'll recall, CloudForms 3.0 and previous were all based on SOAP, and a REST API will be coming in version 3.1. And these initially are going to cover a RESTful API for services, so being able to launch services straight through the REST API, as well as all the insight features will be available through the REST API. And that will be added upon, and eventually the SOAP API would be deprecated, although there's no specific release that's planned for at this time. The automation, workflows, and content management. One of the big things that was heard from CloudForms 3.0 was that the ability to manage that area from an operational standpoint was difficult. So they've built a separate read-only area so that users can't go in and change, say you couldn't go in and change the read-only area. This would be things like the default way that RHEV provisions or the default way that we handle VMware as a provider. So those can't be changed. And included with that, they've brought in granular import and export capabilities. This means that you can go in and export even down to the dialogues and buttons and import them into another appliance. So a lot of work has gone into that to make it easier to share the different things that are built inside of CloudForms. Along with that, they've also built a change control process of content change. So a way to actually have kind of a saved versioning inside of there, if you will. Okay, so CloudForms 3.1 on the OpenStack side, some of the things, the big thing here that I actually didn't highlight, but the big one is tenant support. So one of the problems, the initial problems with CloudForms 3.1 is that you could not connect to the, when CloudForms connected to OpenStack, it was kind of opaque. Yeah, I see that, Nick. Yeah, exactly. So basically, when you would connect to OpenStack, it'd be the same as connecting to Amazon, in that you'd be connecting with a single credential. But this is going to provide tenant support, meaning you can connect as an administrative user or a user with more access to other users, and then basically start to bring those users across as tenants through CloudForms. So that's going to open up a lot of opportunities, we believe. The other one is image analysis. So looking into Glance and being able to analyze what's inside of those images, as well as networking insight and provisioning. So you will be able to discover the Neutron networks and provision Neutron networks on OpenStack using CloudForms, as well as getting an instance console. Like I said, they replaced the proprietary libraries. The community, ManageIQ community, which was announced at the OpenStack Summit, is going to be shipping a community build, which will be based on CentOS. So that's actually in process now. And they haven't forgotten about RHEV. So there's support for CloudInit in RHEV coming. So since RHEV now supports CloudInit by the REST API in RHEVM, that's going to be leveraged, as well as a VM console. And finally, there's dynamic dialogues and dependencies coming from a service catalog management. So you'll be able to dynamically populate the dialogues when you're creating those custom dialogues in Automate. This will allow people to, say, for example, you wanted to go out and query, I don't know, the Yahoo for, where the most interesting news stories are coming from, and then let people provision their cloud workloads to those areas. Probably a bad example, but you'd be able to dynamically populate those service dialogues based on your input from there. All right. So that is essentially the roadmaps for the individual products in Red Hat Cloud Infrastructure. I hope that's useful for you guys. If the goal of being able to discuss RHCI is not to be able is so that you don't get stuck kind of just talking about the individual product, but always coming back up to what we're doing at the infrastructure level and then being able to relate back down into it. It's definitely not an easy thing to be able to track all the various things that are moving in, say, CloudForms, RHEV, and RHELOSP, but hopefully this roadmap's giving you a good idea of where we're going directionally. So let's talk about the Red Hat Cloud Infrastructure future capabilities. Mick asked if we know if the tenant support will be ROS version specific. That is a good question. I don't think there's any dependency on anything in Icehouse, Keystone and Icehouse specifically, but I don't know what the support statement is there. I should. That's a good question. Let me take that offline and get back to you. I will respond back kind of the Q&A with the rest of everybody else's. CloudForms 3.1. What about Hyper-V support? Yes. So I'm not sure if John Hardy is in here. I was asking him about the latest on that this morning, and according to John, he had mentioned that he had demoed that, the Hyper-V support. It is mostly Insight-centric at this point. And if he promised it to you, then you could definitely take his word for it, and you don't need mine. No, I'm just kidding. I think that will be coming in 3.1. They're modeling out just like they modeled out RHEV and VMware and OpenStack. The maturity level of Hyper-V support is probably going to be more on the Insight side and less on the control and automate sides. But yes, as far as I know, it will be in there as well. Of course, Hyper-V is not part of RHCI, so that's why I left it out. All right, so let's talk about the future, and a little bit of a warning that the following information is not a commitment, but and in fact, it's most likely going to turn out a lot different than what I tell you right now. So, Andrew, I don't believe there are any other public cloud providers that are targeted for 3.1. He was asking about Azure, Rackspace, or others. Okay, so let's talk about moving on to the future capabilities, right? So you remember I put up that slide in the beginning, and I said, RHCI is meant to give everybody all the capabilities they need to build a private cloud. Well, the reality is that one of those capabilities, two of them really, lifecycle management and then config and change management, RHCI is currently lacking in, right? So we don't provide a prescriptive method with RHCI for how to manage the lifecycle of systems, and we don't provide a way for people to do configuration and change management necessarily. Essentially, if you wanted to deploy the infrastructure as a service, you're either deploying RHEV or OpenStack there. And today, customers can do this by either purchasing satellite from us, but even if they do that, we're not giving them any kind of value add for how satellite does this. Secondarily, we have not, so if they want to deploy RHELOSP, we can certainly use satellite to do that, but we don't provide any kind of real value around, why satellite is better at deploying OpenStack than anybody else's tooling, right? And we also don't provide config and change management on an ongoing basis. And we also don't provide a lifecycle manager for CloudForms. Basically, you drop in an appliance, and then you could hook it to satellite if you want to. So we're kind of lacking in this area in RHCI. So what we're proposing is that we're going to be including satellite in RHCI. So there's no we have not determined the specific release when this will happen in. It may happen after the GA of Satellite 6.0. It may happen, in the 6.1 timeframe. We haven't locked that down yet. But there is definitely a consensus around including satellite in RHCI for this reason. So currently, Satellite 6.0 is tentatively scheduled for the August, I believe, September timeframe of this year for a GA. And then farther out in 2015 is when Red Hat Satellite 6.1 would be coming in there. So yes, Mick says +1. Please, if you agree with including in there, always voice your opinions loudly. This is Red Hat after all, right? So there's really, we're not sure when this functionality is going to be delivered, whether it'll be 6.0 shortly after 6.0 or all the way out to 6.1. But there's really three areas where we feel that that Red Hat Satellite 6 can benefit RHCI. And these are really the three areas that we see. One is around common lifecycle management for all components of RHCI. So, one of the things that we can really go above and beyond everybody else in the industry is being able to show a common way of not only deploying, but updating data center virtualization based on RHEV, private clouds based on OpenStack, and our cloud management platform, right? And as Andrew had mentioned, you know, and as Andrew had mentioned about our Red Hat storage and Ceph, right? The reason this is important is as our infrastructure portfolio grows, we want to be able to continue to provide that common lifecycle management for the components so that the user experience and the operational pain of running a private cloud is reduced, right? The user experience is made better and the operational experience is reduced, right? So that's the first one. The second one is really around the co-location of lifecycle management services with platform resources. So what do we mean by this? Well, today, as some of you might know, if you go out to Amazon and you launch a certified Red Hat guest image and you run yum update, Red Hat has worked very heavily with Amazon and our other CCD partners to provide something that locates and mirrors our content close to all those tenants, right, inside of those public cloud providers. And so this means that the user is not being charged for outbound bandwidth from the public cloud provider, and they get a better experience. It just, as soon as they run yum update, it's updated, and it provides more of an incentive to use Red Hat at the tenant layer than somebody else. So similar to that, what we'd like to do with satellite is really focus on how do we horizontally scale satellite across the components of Red Hat Cloud Infrastructure. So an example would be that you deploy satellite alongside underneath RHEV or underneath your Nova compute nodes, so that when the tenants run, you know, updates, they're updating close to those compute nodes, as an example. This is something that we're beginning to explore. And the third one is around utilizing content and configuration from within the catalog items designed in CloudForms. So here, what we're talking about is basically going in and being able to, as you discover from CloudForms, as you start to design your catalog item, being able to select host groups from satellite and, you know, content views from satellite and be able to associate those. In this way, we're providing kind of an infrastructure as a service plus model that allows people to design, you know, more than just VMs, and it utilizes that content and configuration from satellite. Those are the three areas. The first area we're really focusing on is that common lifecycle management today. So let me show you one of the things we're looking at for this. It might be a little hard to see. I'm going to post, the slides I post externally won't have this, but I could certainly link you to the Mojo page internally that has the full wireframe. But the idea is that if you're familiar with what's going on with Red Hat Enterprise Linux OpenStack platform today, they are shipping Foreman as an installation utility. And along with Foreman and RHELOSP 5, they are going to be shipping something called the OpenStack Foreman installer, which is a wizard-driven way to deploy OpenStack. And there's a session on that tomorrow that I'm doing. You guys can feel free to join. I'll take you through some of that in more detail. But essentially, what it does is it makes satellite a installation vehicle to install another product at Red Hat. And so we'd like to build upon that in the context of RHCI, basically allowing people to deploy a small live image in their environment that would then bootstrap satellite. And from satellite, they would have a new menu item called deployments. And underneath there, they would have RHCI as an option. Upon selecting that, they would be able to basically ask for a new RHCI deployment. And then they would be guided through a wizard that would basically ask them what they want to deploy. So here you'll see they're being asked, do they want to deploy RHEV, OpenStack, or CloudForms? They could select, you know, any number of the combination here. And of course, as RHCI grows, let's say we start to integrate Ceph and Gluster, we could add those options into here as well. And the goal is that once they select that, they would then be basically taken through a deployment, a bunch of deployment screens that would help them deploy their new RHCI deployment. So it would take them through satellite first, and this would involve configuring their satellite, generating the manifest from the customer portal, syncing the content down to their satellite live image. Then it would take them through RHEV and OpenStack and CloudForms deployments, respectively. So the end state would be that they would press a button and it would install their environments. This would include, you know, bare metal discovery and layering on of all the host groups and figuring all that out. And they could then be presented with the URL to their RevM admin console, their Horizon console in OpenStack, their CloudForms console. And it would actually string together all the identity management as well. So that satellite live image would basically allow for kind of single sign-on through these different environments. So with that, that's kind of where we're going. We're looking at how we can build out the common lifecycle management within RHCI 6 timeframe, the inclusion of satellite inside there, and then we're continuing to work on the integrations between OpenStack and RHEV, as well as between CloudForms and OpenStack and RHEV as well. We started to discuss with the storage team around how we can begin to integrate the Gluster story more heavily, and so we're also pursuing those. But with that, we've got about 10 minutes left. Let me go ahead and open it up for questions. The slides should be available at this URL, allthingsopen.com. I removed some of the slides, but they should be there now. So if you want to download those, you can. With that, I'll open it up for questions. All right. Well, if there's no questions, hope you guys have a good lunch now. And oh, here's one. How long until we can manage Docker images from CloudForms management engine? From Andrew. So that's a good question. So they have I think, an informal goal of by the end of the year to be able to discover and audit Docker containers running on RHEL. So I believe that's going on right now. Any other questions? OpenShift Enterprise Gears. Well, so OpenShift Enterprise Gears will be Docker containers, right? So I don't know if there'll be discovery through the broker, but that's something that probably needs to be worked out. We could definitely take that offline. Great. I'm going to grab the output of this and yeah, feel free to use the slides that I posted publicly wherever you guys want. And if you want to get at the NDA information, let me know and I will post it on Mojo and get it out to you guys as well. One last question. Regarding the Glance and VMware, what all versions of vSphere is supported? That's a good question. I do not know off the top of my head. Let me pull those and we'll add them to the stack. All right. Well, thanks, guys. Enjoy the next session. I'll give you guys 5 minutes to grab some coffee. Thanks.